From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to this special edition of Newsmakers, a debate among the candidates for Rhode Island Attorney General. Hello, I'm Tim White. The state's top prosecutor has an enormous amount of responsibility overseeing a budget this fiscal year of more than $36 million, managing some 230 staffers, including 100 attorneys, many of them on the front line of bringing people to justice. During this hour-long debate, we'll try to show you the differences between the two candidates looking for your vote, and they are, from left to right on your screen, Republican Dawson Hodgson and Democrat Peter Kilmartin, the incumbent. We'll hear from them in a moment. I'll be moderating this debate and asking questions along with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from each of our candidates. The order was determined by a drawing. Up first is Peter Kilmartin. Mr. Kilmartin has been Rhode Island Attorney General since 2011. Prior to that, he was a Democratic state representative from 1991 to 2010, eventually serving as Majority Whip. Mr. Kilmartin was an officer for the Pawtucket Police Department for more than 20 years, where he handled prosecutions. He's a graduate of Roger Williams University and Roger Williams University School of Law. Mr. Kilmartin, your opening remarks.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Ted, and thank you to WPRI 12 for hosting this debate today. It's been my privilege to serve as your Attorney General for the last 4 years, the culmination of over 30 years of experience in the justice system. And this November, I'm asking you for your support to continue moving Rhode Island forward. My priority has always been to protect and advocate for our community. As your Attorney General, I've worked with the Ocean State's finest public servants, taking major steps to make our community safer from guns, gangs, and drugs, to protect our children from abuse and from online predators, and to prosecute public corruption at every level. My record of lifetime service to the people of this state speaks for itself. That's why I'm asking you for your vote to continue this hard, important work to ensure the safety and security of Rhode Island's future together. Thank you, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Kilmartin. Now, Dawson Hodgson. Mr. Hodgson has been a Republican state senator since 2011, where he is currently the deputy minority leader. Prior to that, he was a prosecutor in the Rhode Island Attorney General's office from 2005 to 2010. Mr. Hodgson is an attorney currently practicing at East Greenwich-based Martineau Davis & Associates. He's a graduate of Bucknell University and the University of Connecticut School of Law. Mr. Hodgson, your opening remarks.
Tim, Ted, thank you. Peter, it's good to be with you today. I'm Dawson Hodgson, and I'm running for Attorney General because I believe that all Rhode Islanders deserve safe streets, a strong economy, and public trust. As a prosecutor and a state senator, I've devoted my life to these ideals. And as your next Attorney General, I have a plan to achieve them. From gang shootings in our streets to Rhode Island's reputation for political corruption and incompetence, it's no secret that we have a lot of problems to fix. I'm asking you, the people of Rhode Island, for that responsibility. I look forward to this conversation and the opportunity to share my vision for the office of Attorney General as an effective leader who will always put the people first. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. All right, gentlemen, now to the topics at hand. As you both know, there's no strict format to today's debate. We will allow for some back and forth. In fact, we encourage it, but as long as it's with the topic at hand. We're going to begin now with the first question, and it goes to Mr. Hodgson. Rhode Islanders are still upset about what happened with the failed 38 Studios deal, and you've made this the centerpiece of your campaign. For the Attorney General to prosecute anything in 38 Studios, there has to be evidence that a crime has been committed. Specifically, what crime do you believe occurred, and please cite the state statute you think was violated?
Well, Tim, I'd first have to disagree with any contention that 38 Studios is the centerpiece of my campaign. As a matter of fact, the AP came to my campaign headquarters and interviewed me extensively last week, and it was over 28 minutes before we reached the topic of 38 Studios. Public trust and public integrity and public safety are the core functions of that office, and they have been the focus of my campaign. Now, you're correct. The people of Rhode Island are aware that there has been no justice for 38 Studios. It's been over 2 years, well over 2 years, since the bankruptcy of that case. Over 4 years since my opponent voted for that bill as a state legislator. And the results speak for themselves. There aren't any. In terms of criminal conduct, you're absolutely right. You can't charge something until you have evidence that a specific crime has occurred. Unless I have access to the grand jury proceedings, if there is one, or the contents of the state police file, I can't make that determination. It's equally irresponsible for anybody to say that there was a crime or there was not a crime without thorough examination of that record. My initial responsibility to the people and my first priority of my administration when we start a public integrity unit at the Office of Attorney General will be to resolve the 38 Studios scandal.
How?
Well, the Attorney General, as you know, is not just the state's top prosecutor, he's the state's attorney, the state's lawyer. I will undertake a comprehensive review of the civil, criminal, and administrative investigations related to 38 Studios, and I'll report to the people by May 1st, 2015, to the status and progress of those cases. This isn't a complicated matter. This is a matter of following the facts and the law where they take us. And the people of Rhode Island can be assured that I am going to respond in a timely way and resolve this issue. It's a stain on our state's reputation that won't go away until it's fully resolved.
Mr. Kilmartin, he calls it a stain on the state's reputation, and I got to tell you, a lot of people, for a lot of people, this has been the most upsetting public crisis since RISDIC, and they want to know, frankly, where have you been on this?
Tim, I'm so happy you asked this question because my opponent has been misleading the public on this issue since he announced his candidacy. Let's start from the beginning. In 2010, I, as a rank-and-file state legislator, voted for a loan guarantee program to authorize dollars to go to the Economic Development Corporation for dissemination. That's what I voted for. After that, Republican Governor Don Carcieri, who led the EDC board and the board, vetted the 38 Studios proposal, and they voted to grant those dollars to 38 Studios. After 38 Studios went bankrupt, the Rhode Island State Police acknowledged the opening of an investigation, one in which our office, the Attorney General's office, is a part. That's the status of that. Now, you may recall the Chuck Morrow Central Falls case. That case took almost 3 years to bring to trial. 3 years. This is a complicated case. You can't just say, oh, we have to put a timeline. You can't accelerate it or decelerate it for political purposes. And I find it very interesting that my opponent has said that I've said nothing because I am bound by court rules of professional conduct from commenting beyond the fact that there is an investigation. What I also find interesting is his proposal before the legislature, the one which he says is an independent commission. First and foremost, that would interfere with the Rhode Island State Police investigation. Second, that is a political commission. 8 of the 9 commissioners he would like to appoint would be appointed by the General Assembly and the governor. That's political.
Mr. Hodgson, can you respond to that?
And
please?
I have more to say, too, if I have the chance.
Mr. Hodgson?
Tim, you know, the Attorney General's statements now just don't add up. When he was asked about this issue shortly after the prospect of my candidacy was raised, he made it clear to the people interviewing him that his was not an investigatory agency. It took me and a lot of former prosecutors by surprise to hear him say that, almost as if he was unaware of his power of having a statewide grand jury, the most powerful tool, investigative tool available to law enforcement. Once he had an opponent, the story changed. Peter Kilmartin has shown he'll give you about as much justice as I make him, and that's not leadership.
Mr. Kilmartin?
Once again, he's misleading the public. The state police is the lead investigation. And that's the way it is almost in any investigation that's criminal in nature. We assist in that investigation. When there is enough evidence gathered, that's when you go to the grand jury in any investigation. That's the way the process is set up. That's the way the process works. What he would have happen further with his commission is he would actually give the governor veto power over the Attorney General's ability to bring suit. And the last part, which is the most egregious, he sets up a process by which at the end the commission can order, in violation of separation of powers, the presiding justice of the Superior Court to grant criminal immunity, once again interfering with the ongoing Rhode Island State Police investigation.
Mr. Hodgson, I'd like to ask you about that independent commission. It requires, unless I'm mistaken, the General Assembly to pass it, correct? So is there any indication from the predominantly Democratic General Assembly that they would do such a thing and pass your independent commission?
Tim, at this point, it doesn't look like that.
So is this a campaign pledge and promise?
No, the independent commission that I proposed through legislation really was one of the focuses of my final term in the state Senate. I was proud to have co-sponsorship of 17 other state senators who all believed that this was the appropriate course of action and got behind the bill. It didn't pass because legislative leadership stopped it. However, at the Judiciary Committee hearing it, my colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who are really the legal leaders of this state, the people who draft, craft, and pass our penal laws, all said that this was the appropriate course of action to remove this from the legislative context, where all of these senators and representatives had voted for the bill, and from the completely unknown criminal context. The most important thing to keep in mind is that there are a number of goals that need to be vindicated for the people of Rhode Island on 38 studios. First is financial recovery. We need to maximize our financial recovery.
Briefly, please, we'd like to move on.
The second is answers. The people deserve to know who put us in this position, how they did it, and how we're going to make sure it never happens again. Peter Kilmartin, after 20 years in the Rhode Island General Assembly, is frankly just too close to the political establishment that crafted this legislation. He voted for the bill to give the public any confidence that he can have the independence.
Mr. Kilmartin, I'll give you the final word on this. I owe you a little time. And to his point, why wouldn't you appoint a special prosecutor, even for perception reasons?
Because I never voted for 38 studios. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised the defense isn't trying to say that I should be recused from this, because I was deceived too as a legislator. That's the fact. That's a fact. And the other fact of this matter is the commission, the reason why it wasn't passed was for all the reasons I've stated. My record is clear as Attorney General. I've prosecuted former legislators. I've prosecuted a chief of police. Yesterday, we got a conviction on a police officer. We've prosecuted clerks in cities and towns. Our record, my record, in the past 4 years is that we do prosecute corruption without fear, favor, or ill will. That's the real record.
I do have to ask you, he stole the words out of my mouth, but who deceived you when you
Well, I believe that we had a package before us that said $150 million for an economic development program. I believe, and I have to be careful with my words because I can't talk about an ongoing criminal investigation, but I believe there are those parties who knew that some of that money was earmarked for 38 studios.
Okay, we're going to move off this topic now and go to Ted Nesi. Ted?
I want to ask both of you for a little more insight into how you view the Office of the Attorney General, and Mr. Kilmartin, we'll start with you as the incumbent. What do you consider the single biggest accomplishment of your first 4 years as Attorney General?
Oh my goodness. There are so many. One thing I'm very proud of is the fact that we internally set up a child molestation and abuse unit just to deal with that heinous crime, one of the worst of all crimes. And they are specifically trained. They work with Hasbro Children's Hospital and Day One and DCYF and local and state police. So when a child is a victim of this type of crime, we now combine our resources so children don't get re-victimized, and we have a better prosecution and hopefully not only get justice for the victim at the end, but also the mental health and physical health treatments that they deserve. That's an accomplishment I'm very proud of.
The flip side of that, what do you consider the biggest failure of your first 4 years as Attorney General?
Well, there are a lot of accomplishments that I still want to complete. I want to complete the upgrades of the data systems in that office. When I came in, I found that we were doing payroll by 3x5 cards. That's last century type. It isn't even technology. So one of the things I want to do is to really fulfill that mission of bringing us up to speed, and I've begun that process.
Mr. Hodgson, different version of the same question to you. What would be your #1 priority if you became the Attorney General?
The #1 priority for me as Attorney General is to fix Rhode Island's reputation. Our economy will never recover unless people have confidence that their relationship with their government will be governed by the rule of law, not the old insiders network or the good old boy network that we all know too well. It's holding our state back. And I'd have to correct Peter. You don't have a child molestation unit, you have a child abuse unit. Now, all of the principles you've discussed are absolutely valid, and I support them. But it's important to understand the distinction between those two. They're very serious and they're very different crimes. Now, in terms of my criticisms of the incumbent, his failures range across public safety to public integrity.
Hold on, I didn't ask you about his failures at this moment. I want to ask you what you consider actually the best thing Peter Kilmartin has done, since you'll be talking a lot about his failures.
Well, as a legislator, Peter Kilmartin, we wouldn't have charter schools in the state without his actions as the House Majority Whip, so I respect that. I think that's some common ground that we have. And I also appreciate the texting and driving outreach. I will continue that partnership with AT&T to make sure that kids sign up the No Texting and Driving Pledge.
And Mr. Kilmartin, on this child abuse distinction, what do you say to that?
He's splitting hairs. The fact of the matter is this unit deals with molestations and abuse of children. He's trying to once again mislead the public as to my record.
Mr. Hodgson?
Ted, you know, I've heard Peter talk about the child molestation unit now all over the state and the media, and he doesn't make a distinction. As somebody who has spent extensive experience prosecuting felony cases in our courts, unlike the Attorney General who's never tried a jury case, I understand why it's important to know the difference between those two crimes. Juries split hairs. And, you know, returning to the question of who deceived you about 38 studios, being most generous to you, Peter, you voted for that bill, $75 million loan guarantee, and you didn't read the fine print.
Mr.
You're
Hodgson,
our state's lawyer. We deserve better.
I'll let you respond, but Mr. Hodgson, we have covered 38 studios pretty extensively in this debate. 30 seconds, Mr.
There was
Kilmartin.
nothing in that bill regarding 38 studios. Again, his attempt to mislead the public as to my record. And this has been happening continuously through this campaign. He just did it on several fronts. We have a unit that is important to this state and the children of this state. And I created it. That's the reality. That's not misleading.
Okay, let's get to a rapid fire section here. There are just some quicker topics we want to hit up, and I'm looking for one-word answers from both of you. I'll start left to right and then alternate the order. So, Mr. Hodgson, yes or no, do you support a constitutional convention?
I will be voting for it.
And Mr. Kilmartin?
No.
Yes or no, Mr. Kilmartin, do you support driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants?
Provided we have the proper safeguards like national background checks.
That would be a yes, provided what you said, yes. Okay, Mr. Hodgson?
No, America does not have two classes of people.
Yes or no, Mr. Hodgson, should emails to and from elected officials except with constituents be a public record?
I'm sorry, except for emails with constituents?
With constituents, yes.
I believe so.
Mr. Kilmartin?
That and privileged communications.
Okay. And would you support, Mr. Kilmartin, support or oppose a bill that would establish a legal market for licensed businesses to sell marijuana to adults 21 years of age or older?
Oppose.
And Mr. Hodgson?
No, but I'm prepared to make sure that any type of regulatory framework in that area is effective in realizing the goals that it's supposed to.
Final rapid fire. There's been some high-profile violence in Providence lately. State Senator Paul Jabbour says nightclubs should be kicked off Federal Hill. Do you agree or disagree, Mr. Hodgson?
No, I think this is a matter of policing and finding the types of resources available to make sure that safety is ensured. We need to make sure Rhode Islanders can enjoy this state.
Mr. Kilmartin, kick nightclubs off Federal Hill?
They have to do proper zoning and business regulation, and now with 60 more police coming into Providence today, that should also help that situation.
So you wouldn't want to kick nightclubs off?
Well, I think they need to regulate them.
Well, why don't we stick here and have a broader conversation about crime in Providence. We have a question from the Executive Director of Alliance for Safe Communities, Carolyn Medeiros. She wants to know what, if any, is the role of the Attorney General in helping to address the serious issue of crime in the city of Providence. Mr. Kilmartin.
Well, we've continuously done that. One, we've prosecuted the head of the MS-13, Bonolo. He's in jail now. We work very closely, our units in the prosecution division, the criminal division of the office, very closely with the detectives on the city of Providence. We work very closely with our partners in the U.S. Attorney's Office, sharing information, doing investigations, and looking for where the next crime is, utilizing people that we've prosecuted for information. So that already is ongoing, and we do that daily.
Have you increased scrutiny in Providence since some of the violence has picked up?
I have actually had prosecutors who some people have called detectives on the Providence Police Department. We have a great deal of interaction.
Mr. Hodgson, what role do you see the Attorney General playing in Providence?
A leading role, Tim. And as Attorney General, it will be one of my priorities. It's absolutely critical to achieve safety in our communities. No parent in Rhode Island should ever put their child to bed at night to the sound of gunfire. And they do now. Just last Sunday, 5 gang shootings within 24 hours. Now, this is the end result of a broken justice system. When Peter Kilmartin announced his plans to run for Attorney General, he said that fixing the 1-year backlog at the state crime lab would be his, quote, top priority. He made it clear that it was broken, he said it was a travesty, and he said it would be his top priority to fix it. That's important because in order to charge any type of gun case, the guns that are already illegal, you have to have a firearms examination at the crime lab. If it takes over a year to conduct that, that delays charging it puts Rhode Island at risk. Peter said it would be his top priority, yet he was elected in 2010, he was sworn in January 2011, And he didn't attend his first meeting of the State Crime Lab Commission until January of 2013. 2 years. You're only the chairman. Your top priority. No wonder we're waiting for 38 studios. And do you know what they asked for? They asked for help at the Crime Lab Commission that he attended. They asked for access to the Google funds. $60 million windfall to the office through no effort of this Attorney General. And he said no. All he's done is buy himself a building and some minor investments. I would make that a priority of mine.
Your response to the crime lab?
He threw an awful lot in there, and I have to respond if I may. First of all, we have a presence at every meeting at the crime lab. We have a vast office. The deputy goes in my stead when I cannot attend. And he's right, there was a backlog at the crime lab. But what he's misstating is the fact that we addressed it. We've prioritized the cases. So when we go to trial, we inform them that we're going to trial, we need the forensics. So we've prioritized what's in the crime lab. We don't necessarily have to have every weapon checked now, because some deals will get pled out. So we're saving them time and resources by doing that priority. The solution to the crime lab, which I've been advocating for since day one, is that the legislature, of which my opponent was a part, needed to, and still needs, to give them the resources that they need, personnel, which, by the way, Google does not allow to spend monies on. They need personnel to get the crime lab up to speed so they can better address these. The perfect example of what's happening at the crime lab occurred within the past day or two. They had a priority with the letter threatening the children in the state. They moved that as the priority. That's what management is. That's what my opponent misunderstands and misleads the public on.
Mr. Hodgson, I'll give you 30 seconds as the final statement in this section here, and he points out you can't use Google money for the crime lab.
Tim, that's just not true. You know, there are guidelines from the Justice Department on the use of this money. I released in February a fairly detailed framework for how to distribute that to meet pressing and long-neglected justice and safety needs in our state. Now, a number of times in Rhode Island, our police agencies have used that money outside of the guidelines because they seek waivers. Like using it to shore up the public pension system, that's not allowed for in the guidelines either. But it was done because that was seen as the best way to help the police departments in those towns. You have to have a willingness to innovate, Peter. You have to be able to think outside the box and bring these unique resources and tools that you have available to bear. But refusal to consider them because they come from a political opponent or because you want to control that money yourself is just unacceptable, and you continue to put the citizens of this state at risk.
Mr. Kilmartin.
Please allow me to respond to that. First of all, there are specific guidelines from the Asset Forfeiture Division of the Department of Justice. Those two examples of waivers were extraordinary circumstances. You will be seeing media reports soon as to the scrutiny that's happening nationally on the expenditures of asset forfeitures. That's what these Google dollars are. They are severely restricted.
The criminal penalties.
Mr. Hodgson, please.
These are asset forfeitures. And these dollars are under severe restrictions. And I have utilized them prudently for the benefit of the office and the citizens we serve. For instance,
briefly, please.
Very briefly, $1.8 million to upgrade the criminal history database that hasn't been upgraded since 1999. That serves local law enforcement. $350 to be matched with a $1.1 million grant to bring up our fingerprint ID system. $300,000 for the precious metals database to update that, which was once paper-driven. In fact, my first year in office, I saved in my budget $200,000 to do just that, and the General Assembly, with my opponent, took that money.
Okay, we're gonna shift gears, and Ted has a question for Mr. Hodgson.
Both of you have lobbed charges against each other, or your campaigns and your parties, related to the State Ethics Commission. So I want to ask about those, and I will start with you, Mr. Hodgson. On Thursday, the Rhode Island Democratic Party submitted a complaint to the Ethics Commission, charging that you failed to fully disclose your ownership of farmland, as well as your executive role in Sodco Incorporated as a state senator. Did you fail to fully disclose?
I would like to thank Peter for the opportunity to correct my clerical oversight and demonstrate one of the major and fundamental differences between he and I. If I make a mistake, I take responsibility for it, and I correct it immediately. Now, when Peter...
What was the mistake?
The mistake was, although Sodco was listed in all of those reports, and I was listed as an owner of the company, I did not list secretary and director. And as far as the farmland, This is Sodco. Many people are familiar with our family farm down in North Kingstown, and I listed it as farmland. It includes 2 barns and a house as well. So I've amended those to reflect it.
Mr. Kilmartin, are you satisfied with that? Your party put out the
I
complaint?
find it very interesting. He thanked me for it, and he's more than willing to say that I should be called on ethics when he apparently doesn't know how to fill out a simple form. According to what I saw what the party put out, was he sent in a form in April, as was required. It didn't have complete information. Then months later, he updated it, still without complete information. So if he wants to talk about ethics, ethics really should start at home with the forms that we all fill out. They're very simple forms, and they're not hard, and the information should be easily at hand.
Brief response, Mr. Hodgson, since we're talking about farmland rather than the AG's office right now.
Well, I think really what Rhode Islanders are concerned about with ethics, and this is really a sort of a desperate political ploy on behalf of Peter's State House cronies, is how Peter is awarding state legal contracts to a sitting state senator in clear violation of the ethics code. Now, my family business is known to everybody. My ethics filings are an open book. I would invite the public to review them. There's certainly nothing to hide, and this is a private business with my family. But the Attorney General is using public resources to reward a member of the General Assembly, and that's just wrong.
That was my next question.
May
Mr.
I respond to
Kilmartin,
that,
you're going
please?
to have in a moment. Mr. Hodgson campaign has said, to be clear for the viewers, that you awarded more than $47,000 of legal work to State Senator William Conley, as well as $21,000 more to his son, who's a lawyer in his firm. Is that a violation of that State Ethics Commission ban that got Peter Palumbo in trouble with the beach concession contract?
Well, first, that's not apples and oranges, but let's get back to what he's saying about the open book. The book's only open if you complete the chapters. He did not complete the chapters of the ethics filing. That's plain and simple. Secondly, Senator Conley has been conflict counsel since 2010. He put out a press release stating that Senator Conley, that our office did not go out to an RFP for conflict counsel. That shows a gross lack of understanding of the office. You don't go out for conflict counsel with an RFP for professional services. RFPs are not for professional services. This was a case involving kids with developmental disabilities. You're not going to give that to the lowest bidder. You give it to the most qualified. That was Senator Conley. Senator Conley had that ongoing relationship with conflict counsel. He feels quite clearly that he was not in violation. Our office had nothing to do with his son being hired for whatever legal services he did. I don't even know. So it is, again, once again, clearly misleading on the part of my opponent. And if he really feels that Senator Conley was in violation of the ethics, he should file a complaint.
Before we go to Mr. Hodgson, the Ethics Commission, it has gotten a lot of scrutiny lately that it's no member of the General Assembly is supposed to get state employment, including contracts. So why should state lawmakers be getting contracts from the Attorney General's office, if that seems pretty clear in that?
Once again, in this case, Senator Conley, and there is an exception. If you have an ongoing relationship, you can do it. And he was the most qualified. At the end of the day, this was about kids with developmental disabilities. And that was an important nationwide case. It set precedent with the Department of Justice. And there, in my opinion, and in Senator Conley's opinion, based on the rules as they exist, there was no conflict.
Mr. Hodgson, your response?
The Attorney General is misleading you and the public of Rhode Island. A continuous contractual relationship did not exist. Senator Conley, who I respect and consider a friend and sit next to in the Senate Judiciary Committee, did work for the state prior to being elected to the Senate. After he was elected and sworn into the Senate, he was given a new contract to provide legal services. Now, one thing I will say, Bill Conley is one of the smartest attorneys in the state legislature, and he did a very good job on that case. But the Attorney General, the person who is authorized by statute to enforce the ethics code and to prosecute willful violations of the same, should not be walking close to the line, should not be on the razor's edge. But in my view, this is a clear violation of the code. You enticed his violation, and there has to be an independent prosecutor because you, sir, are not in a position to evaluate your own office's culpability in awarding that contract in violation of the code, especially if there's willful conduct.
Once again, enticed him into committing an ethics violation? What a stretch. Again, misleading, using extraordinary language to mislead the public. If the senator believes that there was a conflict on the part of Senator Conley, then he should file a report with the Ethics Commission and let them decide. That is their duty and their role.
Are you going to do that, Mr. Hodgson?
Unlike Peter and his buddies in his state party, which we can accurately refer to as the establishment, I think the Ethics Committee deserves more respect than to be a political playground. It's my job to remove this Attorney General, who I see as somebody who has abused his power and misserved the public at the polls, and I intend to do so. If an ethics complaint is filed, it's not going to come from me. And frankly, when I'm elected, I won't make that decision personally, because I'm never going to let my office appear to be used to settle personal political scores.
Well,
but the people of Rhode Island understand awarding a contract to a sitting state senator occurred. The ethics code prohibits same. Why would you even put your office and Senator Conley in such a position?
I find it interesting that he says he would choose to ignore what he considers a violation of the law. That's not what an Attorney General does. He will probably choose to ignore his own ethics violation rather than correct it and take the punishment.
Peter, you have to listen. I told you, it's been corrected. And the public is welcome to review all of my ethics filings, as well as my extensive policy proposals for the Office of Attorney General that address issues of public integrity and public safety in this state. Many issues that need to be corrected because, frankly, sir, under your administration, this is about as poor performance as we've seen from the Attorney General in a generation.
Again, that is inflammatory and exaggerating language. The fact is, our office, as I mentioned earlier, have prosecuted a chief of police I've known, legislators. The record stands for itself.
Again, we
And
need to make
Mr.
sure those are former legislators.
Mr. Hodgson, former legislators who I knew, and Mr. Hodgson refuses to acknowledge that
let's
because
talk about
he
that.
chooses to. This may be an elective office, and it is. The problem is, in this campaign, he's chosen to politicize it.
Okay, but it brings up a question that I had here under the topic of corruption, and I remember moderating debates in 2010. You vowed to fight public corruption. You rattled off a couple of things there briefly. What is the prime example you can point to show that you delivered on that promise to fight public corruption?
Well, we were actively involved with the Central Falls mayor in the joint prosecution of Chuck Moreau. We did the chief of police, as I've stated, who was stolen. We've established with the Department of Labor and Training for an office to prosecute those who have unemployment fraud and that type of fraud. And we've prosecuted clerks who have stolen and embezzled from cities and towns. I'm about to sign an MOU with the Social Security Administration. They have actually provided federal funding for 5 years for 2 investigators for my office, so we can actually stop fraud from before it happens. That's being proactive about fraud. I got hundreds of thousands of dollars for 5 years for 2 investigators. My opponent got $300,000 from the federal government in subsidies for his farm.
Okay, but let's stay on corruption, though. I think we've litigated the farm issue completely here. You heard him list off his answers and examples, Chuck Moreau in Central Falls, as examples to which he fought public corruption.
Well, I appreciate that Peter sent an attorney to the U.S. District Courthouse with the United States Attorney who led that prosecution, and I'll let him make the claim that he was the leader on that issue. I don't think Rhode Islanders are buying it.
That was a joint prosecution.
And in terms of Chief Whiting, he stole a purse. And I'm not minimizing larceny, but he stole a purse and he confessed. Did you think about not prosecuting him? Come on.
He did not confess. It went to
I'll let you
trial.
respond, Mr. Kilmartin. I'll let you respond.
What we need is an Attorney General who's willing to take the lead on policing Rhode Island's political culture, fix our reputation for political corruption and incompetence. Only then will people have the confidence they need to live and invest and grow their businesses and prosper in Rhode Island. Sir, we have the second lowest level of our trust in government in the United States of America. You promised when you ran for election that you were going to fix it. Now, I'm not saying that you never tried, but you have not succeeded. And the cases that you recite show that you do not understand the difference between larceny and public corruption.
Mr. Kilmartin?
Anyone who abuses their office for any purpose, be it embezzlement, larceny, self-gain, that is corruption. Plain and simple. And I won't say I took the lead. I said we partnered with the Department of Justice.
In the Central Falls case.
In the Central Falls case. And on other cases. We're actually utilizing our offices, cross-designating, sitting here as we speak, prosecutors to do these types of crimes, work them together. That's being proactive about this. These are the mechanizations we're doing internally to better prosecute the crime, to better investigate the crime, and get results for the state of Rhode Island.
Before we get to Ted with the next question, Mr. Hodgson, what about that? I mean, a lot of these prosecutions happen with the U.S. Attorney's Office because, frankly, the federal statutes are far stronger than the state statutes. So when you take a shot at him for that, isn't that really the underlying cause for why a lot of the public corruption cases are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Tim, that may contribute to some of the U.S. Attorney's involvement in these cases and the leadership role that the U.S. Attorney and, frankly, yourself as an investigative journalist take in policing our political culture. But really, the problem is that we've had an Attorney General's office that is political, and it's been staffed for the last 4 years, not staffed, led for the last 4 years by somebody who spent 20 years in the General Assembly. He was Gordon Fox's next in command when Gordon Fox was the majority leader. He's the House Whip, the most political office in state government with extremely close relationships to all of the legislators.
But my question is, are state statutes strong enough to fight public corruption as they stand, even stronger than the federal statutes?
Yes, Tim. And if they weren't, we wouldn't know because we don't actually apply them. The key is, across this issue of public corruption in so many areas facing our state, in public safety, public corruption, labor, the laws don't fail us. The system doesn't fail us. The process doesn't fail us. The people who are elected to implement the same are the ones who fail us, and that's what we have in this administration.
All right, we're going to go to a question from Ted.
May I address that, please?
We have to move on to the debate. Mr. Kilmartin, we have to move on to the next question. We're running out of time. I'm sorry.
Simple question for you both. I'll go to you on this, Mr. Kilmartin. Do you think Rhode Island's current gun laws are too strict, about right, or need to be loosened somewhat?
Well, unlike my opponent who got an A rating from the NRA, I think we need to strengthen our gun laws. I got passed a bill that would make it a crime to possess a weapon that had the serial numbers taken off of it. I've tried to pass a bill that would make it a crime for kids to handle a gun that's illegal, and the NRA opposes that bill. I think we need to ban assault weapons. I think we need to ban multi-ammunition clips, and we need to strengthen these gun laws to protect our streets.
Mr. Hodgson, same question. Do you think Rhode Island's current gun laws too strict, about right, or need to be loosened?
Well, Tim, it's hard to say when they're not properly. I'm sorry, Ted. It's hard to say when they're not properly enforced. If we want to send the message that we don't tolerate gun crime in this state, we have to put people in prison who violate it. Now, the Attorney General referenced one member of MS-13 that went to jail. But how about the person who was charged in the same case for transfer of an illegal firearm who got a suspended sentence? I know that outraged Colonel Perry, which is what drew my attention to the issue when he spoke about it at the public occurrences. Now, it's interesting that he's trying to tie me to the NRA. He was the first one to tell me that I had that A rating, and I'm not sure what changed with them. I think they gave me a C. I've never filled out their survey. I've never voted for any bills other than the ones that the Attorney General touts. I think there is a widespread repudiation of the Attorney General's respect for the Constitution and understanding of the law, but I don't think the NRA is an effective participant in our civic dialogue. When you're talking about firearms and firearms laws, you have to take an incredibly mature approach and not political, because you're talking about two very serious issues. You're talking about lethal force and the impact that has on our citizens emotionally and in their safety. And you're talking about the Constitution, our founding document from which all of our rights flow. I can talk about those in a mature way, and in fact, my ability to speak about these issues has been commended by both the editorial boards of the Providence Journal and the New York Times.
Mr. Kilmartin, many Second Amendment, strong believers in the Second Amendment feel that way too, that it's not a place the government should be intervening as much. Do you disagree with that? Do you have respect for those who feel that way?
I use it as an analogy to the First Amendment. We have free speech, but you're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, reasonable restrictions on guns and assault weapons are not a violation. And the fact of the matter is, I want to get back to one other thing. My opponent talks about the prosecutorial toolbox. I've passed 30 pieces of legislation in my tenure as Attorney General strengthening our statutes so we can prosecute. 30 pieces. He passed one which was based on one of my pieces of legislation. The fact is, we need that toolbox. The fact is, I've had a bill in to make theft of honest services in the state of Rhode Island a crime. That has not passed the General Assembly, and I am still fighting to do that, and that's one of the reasons I have established these partnerships with other agencies, both state and federal, so we can better prosecute these crimes because we don't have all the tools. It's a recognition of that. And so what you do is you make the adjustments. That's what leadership is. That's what management is. He talks about my 20 years in the legislature when I got bills passed to protect kids and to protect women with breast cancer, to get mastectomies. A good, solid record of protecting Rhode Island families, the very record that got me elected in the first place. And what he totally dismisses is my 30 years experience in the justice system from the ground up, learning how to do cases, how to prosecute, and this is the culmination of that. You know, it was interesting, he talks about his vast experience and 4 years in the Attorney General's office. I had a detective captain say to me, 4 years in the AG's office? Peter, that's like taking a 4-year patrolman and making him the chief of police.
All right, I'll let you respond before we move on, Mr. Hodgson.
Was that the retired captain who drives you around for $70,000 a year, Peter? That's just frankly dismissive of the hard work that's done by your junior and mid-level prosecutors, learning to prosecute those cases, looking victims in the eye, putting them on the stand, doing jury trials, all critical experience to that office that you don't have. In fact, you're the first Attorney General since I can recall that's never worked in that office, that doesn't understand the mission of it, and frankly, that's why you don't know the difference between a child molestation unit and a child abuse unit. People deserve somebody with relevant experience.
2 Attorneys General ago, Sheldon Whitehouse had never been Attorney General.
That's not correct. He was a civil prosecutor for the Attorney General's office.
He wasn't a criminal prosecutor. The fact of the matter is, he cannot minimize my experience, as he attempts to do, mislead the voters, as he attempts to do. At the same time, he's correct. Those 4-year prosecutors work hard day in and day out, and some of them are going to grow into the leaders of that office, and they're going to grow into it. They're not going to leapfrog into it.
All right, Mr. Hodgson, last word before I go to the next question, unless you're all set.
Well, Tim, you know, I think the people of Rhode Island will be satisfied that my dedication of my professional career to keeping them safe and serving this state is more than ample preparation for this job. Serving on the Senate Judiciary Committee and being a line prosecutor who has extensive experience prosecuting hundreds of felonies compared to the opponent's 0 results in a favorable contrast in credentials.
I always knew a debate between 2 lawyers was going to be a lot of fun. Mr. Kilmartin, Alfred Brissett, the so-called thrill killer, only served 13 years after murdering a woman with another man in the deep woods of Rhode Island. He, as you know, was freed on parole. At the time, the parole board said no one from the Attorney General's office came to testify against his release. Does that mean your office was okay with his early release, or did someone drop the ball?
Well, first let's look at it in the context. Ken Walker, Dr. Ken Walker, who was the chair of the parole board, clarified later that any input by the Office of Attorney General would not have changed the outcome of that case. The process that was in place for 14 years prior to that case was that every case in which the Attorney General's office can add something to the record, which in this case we could not, we would weigh in on. Prior to that 14 years, they weighed in on everything, so you were like the boy crying wolf. So if you had something to add, we added it. After the Brissett case, I too was troubled by that. So I contacted Dr. Ken Walker and I said, can we get earlier notification so we can pull the old case files and look at those and maybe weigh in even though we have nothing else to add to that case. So I actually fixed that system.
If you were troubled by it afterward, does that mean that you feel someone from your office should have been there during the parole board hearings?
No, because we had nothing to add to that case. That was the system that was in place. That was a systemic failure which I fixed. And the fact is, like I said, Dr. Ken Walker himself has said that nothing that the Attorney General's office could have added would have helped. That's just like 2 recent cases that occurred, William Peliquin and Thomas Lewis. We did weigh in on those cases. Those people were denied parole for about 10 years or so. But you know what? I can no more take credit for them getting denied than I can take blame for Brissett not getting released.
Let's stick with Brissett. Mr. Hodgson, you know, his point is the parole board pored over the materials, his case filed, and they determined that he was rehabilitated.
Tim, you know, the parole board made their statements in the aftermath of a very, very bad and dangerous decision. The Attorney General at the time, you know, his response was, we don't weigh in on all cases. Let me tell you about my experience when I was a prosecutor at the Attorney General's office. Every parole board hearing, all the prosecutors in the office would receive a list of every inmate who was up for parole with a directive: review this list, and if you have concerns, we will raise them at the parole board. How this didn't happen from the Attorney General's office is just, there's no excuse for it.
Once again,
let's set aside your lack of taking accountability for your own office's actions, and let's just talk about how simple this would have been to do. Now, they've offered a number of excuses. They said the prosecutor who left the office wasn't available because that handled the case wasn't available. It still says murder, doesn't it? Doesn't that deserve a file being opened? Don't people who commit violent crimes and murder people, especially something as heinous and high profile as the thrill killer, deserve a read of the file? That didn't happen here. And it feels like it didn't happen at the parole board, that there was an institutional advocate for his behavior in the prison, and that was not, and that sentiment prevailed. But the real travesty of this case, Tim, and you know it because you covered this story, Jeanette Descoteaux was selected to die because the thrill killer knew she was somebody that had nobody to speak for her.
Okay.
She was on the margins of society, and when she appeared for parole and the Attorney General's office did not object, the thrill killer was proven right. There was no one there for her.
I have one more question about this topic, but
because
quick response.
He referenced a process where every prosecutor is notified. That process was in place, still is in place. And further, what I've done, again, with proper utilization of Google funds, we now have a case management system in place. We now have a place where we have parole notes on the computer. I've weighed in on parole cases before I was even a lawyer. I don't know of any cases that my opponent has weighed in on.
Mr. Hodgson.
In fact, I have, and one of the same ones that the Attorney General has weighed in on. The murder of one of my constituents' fathers, I think perhaps it took place before I was born or when I was in grade school. And there was no information to bring forward. It was simply a statement of my constituency that justice hadn't been served at this point. And that was the same objection that Jerry Coyne was bringing to the parole board on behalf of that victim. There was no new information. So for you to characterize that same is for you just to deny and avoid responsibility. Peter, when you make mistakes, they happen, but you do need to take responsibility for them.
Once again, you're misleading the public because you just validated the point.
Gentlemen, we have very little time left in the debate. So briefly here, let's face it, Mr. Brissett was probably going to be released early, even if the parole board had decided to keep him in, and that is because of some good time he had earned behind bars while at the prison. Mr. Kilmartin, again, briefly, what is your opinion of the state's good time and early release program for inmates at the ACI?
Good time is a management tool that the ACI utilizes to give incentives to people to stay in prison and act properly, and give them incentives and tools to go out. There's a recent report out that Rhode Island is one of the best states when it comes, I think one of 5 states cited in recidivism. But good time needed to be reined in, and I led that charge. After Woodmansee was getting out, we drafted the bill. We worked with Senate and House leadership to get the bill crafted just right, so we've reined in good time for those people who did the most heinous of crimes. That was looking at a situation, solving the problem. That's what I do as Attorney General.
Mr. Hodgson, your opinion on good time and early release?
There are a lot of benefits to the good time scheme. We'd certainly never suggested it be taken away. However, the legislation that Peter refers to so proudly, he was fixing the bill that he passed as the majority whip of the House of Representatives that expanded good time so rapidly that it contributed to the earlier release of Michael Woodmansee. We can't afford a leadership of this state whose biggest accomplishment is always undoing their previous biggest accomplishment. That's not progress. We can't always be taking steps forward then backwards.
All right, I'm going to stick with you on this, Mr. Hodgson. As Tim says, we are running short on time. You've been very critical of how Mr. Kilmartin has handled the Deepwater Wind project. Yet many Rhode Islanders do think the state should be getting more energy from renewable energy, particularly amid climate change. Why are you opposed to that project?
Count me as one of those Rhode Islanders that thinks that, that our state and our country and the world need to invest in renewable energy. The Deepwater Wind project, however, I believe is going to set back the credibility of future renewable energy projects in this state when we need them. And in particular, it's the demonstration project off of Block Island that's so problematic. I think the economics of the large-scale wind turbine farm, they can actually work. And I'm certainly not opposed per se to federal subsidies. But the fact is, for five windmills, you're going to take $500 million out of the pockets of Rhode Island ratepayers. Those are citizens, consumers, and there are businesses who need that energy to live their lives and to run our economy. And because of the Attorney General's dropping his predecessor's lawsuit, and it's not just Patrick Lynch that opposed the Deepwater deal not the concept of renewable energy, not the concept of energy independence, that deal to Governor Kachiri's chief of staff, Patrick Lynch, Arlene Violet, Jim O'Neill. You know, this is a question of insider dealing, not whether we support renewable energy.
Before we go to Mr. Kilmartin, what though, it seems as if maybe the ship has sailed on Deepwater when they're getting the permits and everything. If you were elected and became Attorney General in January, is there anything you could do at this point to undo what you see as a damaging project?
Well, Tim, I think that the Attorney General dropping that lawsuit, really he announced it before he was even sworn in, has inalterably harmed the state's legal position. So I don't know that the Attorney General would be in a position to do anything to stop that project. I would like to rein in the excessive cost to Rhode Island consumers if possible, but the ship probably has sailed. One of the biggest problems I'm going to face as Attorney General fixing our reputation is that, you know, we can't move forward as a state until we resolve the ongoing problems, things like 38 studios, the corruption that we know about. But the problem is the line drawing problem. You can't always be looking backwards. You have to resolve what's right in front of you and move forward. And I think
Mr. Kilmartin, it's true that you dropped the lawsuit that Attorney General Lynch had on Deepwater. Why did you do that?
Yes, because that was an important project to this state. And let me say, I am very cognizant of the position of ratepayers in this state. I actually weighed in with the Connecticut General Assembly when they were going to tax power plants in Connecticut. That would have meant, by one estimate, $2.8 million of taxation to Rhode Island ratepayers.
But on Deepwater.
Rhode Island ratepayers. So I'm there for those ratepayers. On Deepwater, the Chamber of Commerce, the unions, everyone is in favor of Deepwater. They look at it as an economic engine. It should bring $110 million of economic activity. There's an estimated $130 million of market price suppression. That's money saving to the ratepayers. There's an estimated $70 million in respiratory health care costs. So there are a lot of cost-benefit analysis that's being ignored by my opponent that will benefit the ratepayers and the citizens of Rhode Island. I sue companies in the Midwest, in Midwestern states, for their pollution in their states that's generated there that comes to Rhode Island. This is about keeping Rhode Island air clean, about protecting our economy, about building our economy, having future jobs, and building a new industry.
I have about 2 minutes left before you both get to your closing statement, so we have to keep this section brief. Mr. Hodgson, you have said your administration, quote, will reverse the current anti-transparency culture of Rhode Island government and the incumbent administration. Mr. Kilmartin actually shepherded a new APRA legislation through the General Assembly, as you know. Give one concrete example where Attorney General Peter Kilmartin was anti-transparency.
Well, I think you just look at the Providence Journal's request for access to the information of compensation of hedge fund managers who invest public dollars. And the Attorney General said that the public's not entitled to it. And he said one of the public purposes was it's not in the public's interest to see that compensation. Not only is that just wrong and anti-transparency, it violates Peter Kilmartin's campaign pledge in 2010 when candidate Kilmartin and candidate Raimondo proposed a new era of transparency for those who invest public dollars. It's another example of the Attorney General says one thing when he's trying to get elected, but when he's given the authority, he does another.
Mr. Kilmartin.
Once again, misleading the public. The fact is that there was proprietary information there which is an exemption. Now, I would love for that information to be disseminated to the public, but the way the statute is written, there are exemptions that allow for proprietary information. Sometimes we have statutes on the books, we don't like the result, but we live with the results because that's our system of government, and that's what a leader does. They follow the law, they see what the conclusion is, and then they accept it.
Would you support having that exemption removed then from the
Well,
legislation?
once again, it could stymie business in the state if you're going to go into a business and say, we want to see your proprietary information so all of your opponents can see it too, and all of your competitors.
Tim, if you
so
want
we have to be very careful when it comes to openness. And as you mentioned, I shepherded a bill through the legislature for over 10 years that was trying to get through. And I'm proud of that accomplishment.
I will only give you 20 seconds here, Mr.
I'm proud of the accomplishment that our open government unit prosecuted more cases in the past 3 years of my administration than in the previous 12 combined.
Very briefly, Mr. Hodgson.
Okay, of the lawsuits you brought, every time you sue the State Property Commission, Peter, you're a member of it. So if you had followed the law in the first place, you could have saved everybody a lot of time and money. Example of why the law is good, but enforcement is poor. I mean, and if you want a less contentious example, look at how the Attorney General abused his power on public records to charge me more than 10 times what he charged somebody else when they sought the same information from the Attorney General's office about their travel records.
Mr. Kilmartin, you will get the final word in closing statements, and I have to give time so each of you can have closing remarks. And again, the order for these closing remarks was determined by a drawing, and we begin with Dawson Hodgson. Mr. Hodgson, your 60-second closing remarks.
Tim, Ted, Peter, thank you for this conversation today, and thank you for your attention to this extremely important office. It's probably the second most powerful office in the state of Rhode Island, and now in the middle of October, it's getting the attention that it deserves. The performance record of the incumbent is not worth returning to him to office, and I think you could sum it up as saying, if you're satisfied with the direction that Rhode Island's going, I'm not your man. But if you believe we can come together and solve problems and have a justice system that is free of patronage, free of self-service, and shows leadership on the issues that matter to Rhode Island, then I am your man. With my experience as a prosecutor who has enforced these laws in the courts, and my experience as a state senator who has led on every substantive issue to come before the General Assembly, taking tough positions because the people demanded him, then this is the type of leadership that I'll bring to the Office of Attorney General. I'd ask you to visit my website, dawsonhodgson.com. You can learn about my specific proposals to fix this state. I believe you'll be satisfied with the contrast. I thank you for your attention today and for your contribution to making Rhode Island a better place going forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hodgson. Now, Mr. Kilmartin, your 60-second closing remarks.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ted. Thank you for the opportunity to look at my track record for the people of Rhode Island, to discuss everything that my office has achieved on their behalf. I think this conversation has made clear what kind of Attorney General I've been for the last 4 years. One who understands the intricacies of the job, who can work across party, agency, and state lines. One who has the maturity and the demeanor to be the Attorney General. Who puts the needs of Rhode Islanders first and foremost. Who can operate open, honestly, and transparently. We've seen where my opponent is lacking. His lack of a record. It's clear. His repeated attempts to mischaracterize my record and that of my staff. The little understanding he has of this office. It's been my honor to serve as your Attorney General, and I'm proud of everything I've accomplished, but we've got a lot more work to do. I'm here to ask you for your support to finish what we've started, to make the office better than I found it, and to leave it better for the next Attorney General. Thank you for your time, and I ask you for your support.
All right, and thank you to both of the candidates for joining us on this Campaign 2014 debate, and our coverage is hardly over yet. Be sure to tune in Tuesday, October 21st at 7 p.m. live from the Providence Performing Arts Center. Republican gubernatorial candidate Alan Fung, Democratic candidate Gina Raimondo, and moderate party candidate Robert Healy on the issues. An hour-long commercial-free debate airing live on WPRI 12. Election Day, of course, is November 4th. Most polls open at 7 a.m. Check with the Secretary of State's website for your town's exact time. All the polls close at 8 p.m. and make sure you bring a valid photo ID with you to your polling location. I want to thank you for watching this special edition of Newsmakers, a debate among the candidates for Rhode Island Attorney General. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.